Good evening, everybody. Hello, my name's Karen, and on behalf of Communify, New Farm Neighbourhood Centre and the patrons of New Farm, I'd love to welcome you here tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land that we meet on tonight, pay our respects to the elders, both past, present and emerging. So a bit about politics in the pub and Communify and New Farm. This event has been happening for many, many years. It's a time when we can get together as a community and debate issues of interest. So tonight we're talking about meat. So that should be an interesting topic. So next time we'd like to tell you that we're going to be exploring transport, technology and the future of our roads. So get ready for that one. I'd also like to introduce you to Margot Donnell, who's going to be our mediator for tonight. Jen Egan, where are you? I'd like you to see Jen, and if any of you are interested in becoming a patron of the New Farm Neighbourhood Centre, please see Jenny. It's a wonderful group that raises money to support the work at New Farm. They're a great group of local philanthropists, and would love any new members, Jen? Yes? Great. So just going to hand over quickly because this is a free event, but of course nothing is free, really. So we are hoping to raise a little bit of money tonight, so I'm just going to pass you over, just tell you how we're going to do that.
Thanks. So I don't know if you noticed on your way in tonight, but there's a little table just down the stairs there. And there's a bit of merchandise on there. There's some wonderful T-shirts and bags and various badges and all the rest. Obviously, this event doesn't just happen through, goodwill, although there is an incredible amount of that. It is going to rely going forward on the help of everybody here in the room tonight. And so if you can, feel free to dig deep, have a look at the merch table on your way out. Not during, though. I think we want to be here tonight. And please help where you can. I think some more information will come out about that a bit later on as well. Thanks.
So on behalf of everyone, enjoy this evening, and handing over to Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Can you hear me? Yeah, this is okay? Good. Yell out if you can't hear any of the speakers. Okay. Well, welcome to everybody here tonight. Great to see a really good crowd. I know that this topic engenders a lot of passion, and I'm expecting there'll be some passion in the room tonight, but also we like to have a respectful discussion, exchange of ideas, so people can be mindful that we've got speakers up here some of whom have come quite a long way, and treat them everybody with respect. For those using social media tonight, we're very with it. Our hashtag is, she says reading it, is #PIP, which stands for Politics in the Pub, New Farm. So #PIP New Farm. You've heard about the merchandise table. We're streaming this event on Facebook Live. How cool is that? And it will be available to watch back on the Communify Facebook page. A podcast of the evening will be available in a week on the Communify website. So they're all my notices. What I need to tell you is how this is going to go. So I'm going to introduce our 5 speakers, and I'm going to ask them all an opening question, which I'd like them to answer, and then I get to ask quite a few questions, some of which they've suggested and some of which some of you perhaps have suggested on the Communify Facebook page. So we'll ask them for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll throw it over to you, the audience, for you to ask questions. Preferably questions. If you want to make a comment, a short comment would be appreciated. There'll be microphones around, and you need to put your hand up and look out for there's one over in that corner. I think there's probably going to be one over in the other back corner. So we should try to finish at about 7:55. Okay? All right, so let's get going. First of all, I'll introduce our panel. They're all exceptionally qualified and talented people, and they all had massive CVs, which I have drastically slashed because I think you'll find out more about them by hearing them talk. But let's get going with it. First of all, I'd like to introduce Brad Ridout, over here on my far right. Thanks. Brad has a doctorate and is a principal research scientist with Australia's National Science Agency, CSIRO. His expertise is in life cycle sustainability, assessment in the agriculture and food sectors, which is used to address strategic challenges in relation to climate change, water scarcity, sustainable food systems, and sustainable diets. Over on my far left is the other Brad. So we have two Brads tonight. That is Brad King. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's not on my left. It's Brad's in the middle.
On your left. He's on your left.
He is still on my left. Brad King is president and founder of Farm Animal Rescue. The charity operates a sanctuary for farm animals that have been rescued from the food industry, where stories and backgrounds of the rescued animals are used to advocate for a kinder world for farmed animals. Brad has been involved in animal advocacy for over 15 years, and through his research and through records compiled by the Farm Animal Rescue Investigation Team, has detailed knowledge of the standard procedures and treatment of farmed animals in today's modern animal agriculture industry. Welcome. On my near right is David Foote. David is Group Managing Director of the Australian Country Choice Group of Companies. Additionally, in 2015, he was appointed Chairman of Australian Cattle and Beef Holdings, a new joint venture of the ACC Group. Headquartered in Brisbane and employing over 1,400 staff, Australian Country Choice operates Australia's largest vertically integrated beef supply chain, encompassing cattle breeding, cattle growing and feedlotting to supply its integrated food processing facility in Brisbane that incorporates beef slaughter, beef boning, value adding and case shelf ready retail packing. I'm sure he can explain that to you better than I could. In 2010, David was awarded Rural Press Proprietary Limited's Beef Achiever of the Year in recognition of his contribution to the industry. Would you welcome David? On my far left is Matt. Let me just find Matt Journo. Matt is the Secretary of the Australasian Meat Industry Employers Union, Queensland branch. The AMIEU represents workers in all facets of the meat industry. These include beef processing, poultry processing, pig processing, small goods and retail. He's been involved in the meat industry for 33 years and has extensive experience in all aspects of the industry. Matt is a member of several government and private sector advisory and training authorities for the meat processing sector. Would you welcome Matt? And last but not least, on my left just here is Amanda Benham, I should say. Amanda is a qualified and accredited practicing dietitian and nutritionist. Amanda has published in the areas of planning nutritionally sound vegan and vegetarian eating patterns for people of all ages and is currently completing a PhD at QUT in the area of vegan nutrition. Amanda runs her own Brisbane-based nutrition practice, Human Herbivore, where she helps people of all ages with healthy plant-based eating, including babies, pregnant and lactating women, children, adolescents, as well as people who want to try a plant-based diet to treat or avoid common health conditions such as diabetes, obesity and cardiovascular disease. Would you welcome Amanda? I just wanted to let you know that we did invite another Amanda to come who has unfortunately at the last minute not been able to come. Just so you know, the other Amanda, whose name is Amanda Sibilia, She has managed Brisbane certified organic meat, and so works in the ethical treatment of our animal production. Meat production. She visits her farmers and has a relationship with the farmers who produce the organic meat. She has studied applied science, and anyway, I won't go on because she's not here. But we will be interested if there's any questions around that area and asking the panel what their views are on that side of the business. Okay. So let's get going. I need to make full disclosure at this point. I am a guilty meat eater, a sporadic guilty meat eater. So I guess I fall more into one camp than another, but I'm trying to give it up. Not very successfully, but... Don't. Okay, my first question to all of you is, and I might start with you, Amanda, what is your personal relationship with meat?
I haven't eaten meat for 35 years. Oh, okay. I've been a vegan for 35 years. So, okay. Yeah. I was brought up believing that we had to eat meat. And when I studied veterinary science, which was the first thing I studied when I left school, I was taught that it was a necessary evil, that we had to eat meat. But in 1983, I found out that we didn't and became a vegan and went on to study nutrition to make sure that, to be really sure that we didn't have to eat meat and that I could help other people to not eat meat too.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Brad, what about you?
Well, my wife does most of the cooking in our house, and she's from Malaysia, and she's loves cooking as her hobby, and so she cooks every kind of cuisine under the sun. So I have a very varied diet of just about everything.
Okay, which includes meat?
Yes.
And you like meat?
Oh, I wouldn't say I like it more than other things.
No. Okay. Brad, what's your relationship with meat?
My relationship with meat? Okay, well, I no longer really have a relationship with meat because when somebody talks about meat, what I really see is animal flesh. So it's possibly more about my relationship with animal flesh. Of course, I have nearly 80 creatures in my care that I look after that people would normally consider to be products that would become meat. And I actually have a very strong and compassionate and caring relationship with them because I can see just how sentient and social and family-loving they are.
Thank you. Matt, what about you?
I've been involved in the meat processing sector most of my life, so for 33 years, as you said before. I'm a guilty carnivore. I love meat. The Norman Hotel is one of my favourite pubs to go and have a steak and a few beers with. Meat's always been a part of my life. I grew up with a rural background, so I've been involved in production as well as processing of meat. So it's just been something that's been in my family for as long as I can remember.
Okay. And finally you, Dave.
You shouldn't feel guilty about eating meat, Amanda. And I eat meat. I certainly eat meat as part of a diet. I come through a generation, I guess, which was meat and 3 veg. Generally the meat was grey and tough. And but we've actually learned how to use it much better nowadays, and I proudly enjoy it as long as I do other forms of protein.
Okay, I'm not sure who, you can put your hands up as to who would like to answer this question. It seems to me, and from what you read, that Australia's relationship with meat eating is going through a state of flux at the moment, more so than some of us who are older knew about when we were kids, when there was meat on the table every day. Why do you think more consumers than ever are turning away from meat diets? I might ask you to start off with that, Amanda.
I think the research has been trickling down that firstly we don't need to eat meat, and that secondly there's benefits to adopting a plant-based diet. So there's some intrinsic attributes of meat that aren't necessarily beneficial, things like the cholesterol, the saturated fat, the lack of fibre, the heme iron and the other carcinogens. A lot of people probably heard recently the World Health Organisation classified processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen, and red meat as the next highest level, Group 2A. Group 1 is the classification of tobacco and asbestos as well. So I think when people hear that sort of thing, they start to rethink their food choices. I think also that people are becoming more aware with the internet and watching YouTube videos and things of where their meat actually comes from. A survey in the early 2000s found that 99% of Australians are against animal cruelty, but 1% at that point didn't eat animals. So there's obviously a very big disconnect there because, animals obviously don't want to die and they fight for their lives just like we would if we were being slaughtered. So I think people are realising that and turning away from it and realising there's a lot of other things that you can eat instead.
We must have different Dr. Googles because my indication is we're still eating 96 kilos of protein per capita per year, so I'm not sensing that trend. I'm certainly not seeing it in my customer that has about 32% of Australia's retail trade.
So you don't think that there's a significant vegetarian or vegan population growing?
I think there's an increasing awareness that there's a vegan population that's growing, but if we just look at pure facts and figures about the number of animals being processed and the kilos going through the Australian processing sector, we're not seeing a turn-off.
Do you want to comment on that, Brad?
Well, I've studied in detail the dietary intakes from 1995 and then to 2012 when there was a nationwide survey undertaken, and meat consumption has definitely changed. People over that period are eating a lot more chicken and they're eating less lamb. They're eating a lot more dark, and things have changed. But I'm not sure that overall there is any broad change in meat consumption. Of course, we hear about very large percentage increases in the number of people interested in vegan diets and so forth. But I think if I'm not wrong, because I come from the environmental sciences, not from the nutritional sciences, but I think in the 2011-2012 Australian Health Survey, I think there was something less than 0.5% of people identified as not eating any livestock products. And even some of the people who identified in such a way, their dietary intake on that day included livestock products. So, even if you were to increase by 10 or 20 or 50%, it's, of a very small base. I think there's interest in all sorts of things coming and going. I think there are trends in food consumption that relate in large part to the immigration that's occurring in this country because people bring different food cultures with them, and I think that's one of the amazing things about Australia is our food system's so rich and diverse and there's so many different cultures, and you can eat just about anything and it's as good as if you went to that country and ate it in many cases. But I think it would be an overstatement to say there's any great massive wave or turning away from meat, in my understanding anyway.
That's interesting. You want to comment?
Yeah, I'd like to. From a union perspective, obviously I'm looking at people's wages, conditions and the money that's actually coming into people's households at the moment. And definitely beef consumption has fallen dramatically over the last 5 years. Previously it was around 40 kilos per person per year. It's dropped now to about 26 is the last MLA statistics that have come out. And I think that's purely through finances. Beef is actually a very expensive commodity in people's shopping and their weekly budgets just don't stretch that far. As a consequence, poultry consumption has gone up considerably. So white meat has become the flavour of the month, and certainly beef consumption has dropped off quite a bit.
Do you want to add anything, Brad, over there?
Yes, I would, because it's interesting, and I agree with that trend. That's certainly something that we've seen and we're actually quite concerned about. And the reason that chicken has become so inexpensive, of course, is because we've done what we've done to this creature. So this creature now takes around 35 days to become greater than the size of what a normal chicken would have been. We see these animals actually going to slaughter, still peeping, still with their yellow feathers. They're still babies as they're going into the slaughter yards. And when we are able to rescue them and take them out of these environments, we're finding that around 90% of them actually don't walk normally. and that there are lots of other issues with respiration and so forth. We have a lot of issue, for example, with the fact that of course, everybody likes the breast meat, and we have a lot of trouble with the fact that the breasts have been designed now to grow so large that it actually invades the lung cavity and it actually causes them to have trouble with respiration and breathing. So the way that I see it is that actually the meat industry has been very successful with this animal in terms of getting a bird or an animal to market really, really quickly, that's huge and overgrown, and therefore very, very cheaply. The way that I see it is that the meat industry would probably like to do that with all the other animals as well if they could. Because at the end of the day, it does come down to the consumer wants a low price. And whenever, unfortunately, we get into the animal industry and consumers are after a low price, it's always the animal that suffers.
Why do you, just follow up on that, why do you think then that your message is not getting through to consumers? That if what David and Brad are saying, people are still consuming meat, whether it be white or dark meat. Why is your message, which is one about respect for animals and seeing them as sentient beings and this sort of, why is that not cutting through, do you think?
Well, I think to an extent it is. I mean, what we're definitely seeing with a portion of the population is that people are eating more animal products because they're seen as easier, they're very, very easy to get through the takeout stores and all of that sort of thing. So I think that part of it is going to be that there are people out there who are eating more meat products and fewer plant-based products in their diet. But we're certainly seeing a number of booming organisations who are producing plant-based foods are doing incredibly well. The number of cafes and restaurants opening up around this city and others in Queensland is phenomenal and nothing like we've ever seen before. I know that the interest that we're getting in the work that we do, and I know that Amanda's very busy as well with the interest that she's got. So we're definitely seeing significant interest. But at the end of the day, we're still talking about very small organisations, we're still talking about very small operations. We don't have the marketing spend that these huge animal-based conglomerates have. So we're still doing videos on the streets and that sort of thing because we can't afford TV and that sort of thing. So I think there's a number of things going on there. I don't accept for a moment, though, that we don't have a populace which is starting to see exactly how the meat industry works and saying, not for me, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, what do any of you want to comment on this? What do you see as the future of the rise of alternative organic meats and the relationship between, free-range chicken consumption as opposed to battery chicken production? Do you think there will be, and is it a good thing, a rise in that sort of meat consumption? Do you want to talk to that one, David?
Organic is actually a method of production, and it's all organic. All goes back to the treatment of the soils. What you grow above the ground of the soil is actually immaterial to the true purpose of organics, which is about managing soils for sustainable practices. So Australia has this magnificent advantage of having its open grasslands. 11 million hectares of open grasslands, which basically is naturally organic. So the Australian consumer is not sensing that their product is unnatural in any sense. And we're a business that started launching in 1999 because following European trends, 25% of our production should be organic by around about 2003. It has never grown past 2%. And that is, so the business I'm in responds directly to consumers' patterns, demands and needs, and they have just not warmed to the advantages or disadvantages of organic.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. But again, I'll go back to my union roots, and really organic production costs significantly more, and people actually pay a premium for an organic product. You tell the house person, whether it be a wife or husband, does the shopping for the week, and they go to pick up a piece of steak for the family. If that steak's 3 times as much as the one beside it, they're going to go for the one beside it. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of the world we live in at the moment. Organic production shouldn't be as expensive as it is. I think there's a premium attached that is disproportionate to the input costs to produce that animal organically. And as David's rightfully said, a lot of our Western country certainly around Cameron's Corner, Birdsville. They fatten a lot of bullocks off herbage out there, and it's naturally organic country. It doesn't really need any input costs into it from what normal production is. But unfortunately, it does attract a premium, and that premium just can't be borne by the average house person to be able to make the weekly shopping budget add up.
Amanda, did you want to say?
Oh, well, I'm just thinking, like, from a health point of view, I know a lot of people are very concerned about the use of antibiotics and hormones and everything in meat production. But harping back to what I said earlier, you know, that's insignificant actually compared to the intrinsic properties of meat that can be problematic. So I'm kind of not actually that surprised that people aren't warming to organic meat. I think people like the idea that animals are better treated and have a happier life. But I think at the end of the day, there's still the slaughter, which a lot of people would have a problem with. So I think it's a little bit delusional for people to think, oh, it's happy meat and therefore they can feel happier eating it, because I think the animal was probably just as unhappy to die. And from a health point of view, I don't think there are huge benefits to organic, to be quite honest.
But are you also saying that it's organic meat, whether it be free-range chickens or whatever, is not particularly better for you than
not as much
meat?
As people like to imagine, I don't think, no.
Okay.
No.
Do you want to add anything to this conversation, Dave?
I don't have too much more to say about that. I think that people, I mean, our society is quite diverse, and some people are drawn to organic produce, whether it's organic capsicums or organic meats or whatever, and often there's a price premium in this country, and I think that the food supply system will provide that where there's a demand, and for some people it's affordable and some people it's not. For some people it means something, for other people it doesn't. I think there's been a lot of studies on organic produce versus non-organic produce and looking for fine differences in nutritional qualities, and I think they're relatively few. I think there's some differences in the fats, and once again I don't want to go too far into the nutritional things, but depending on whether there's been raised on pastures or grains and so forth, it does change some of the biochemistry of the meat and even the flavours of the meat. So, I mean, there's a lot of variation, and at the end of the day, the food system responds to what people are after.
Did you want to add something,
Well, I know it's
Matt?
the crowd that was supposed to ask some questions, but I was just about to, because I was interested in the comments that it's nutritionally no different.
I didn't say that, but it's not as different as people like to imagine, I think.
Because most of the beef that we consume in Australia is grain finished. Just from a commercial reality, to get a consistent, reliable product of a particular standard that's going to eat a particular quality, most of it is grain finished. So it's finished on grain, which does change the conformation and constitution of the animal. It has more intramuscular fat. It develops a different texture, and I am sure has different health implications as opposed to an organic animal that is grown on pasture, allowed to walk around that pasture, exercise in that pasture, so they don't put that intramuscular fat into their muscles as they would be in grain finished. So it was just an interesting comment that I did want an answer.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I didn't say there weren't any differences.
No,
what I
not
meant
as
was
big as
I don't
people.
think it's as huge as people imagine. I think the intrinsic properties of meat are more problematic than that are common to all flesh, whether it's chickens or cows or pigs or whatever, that are more problematic than what the animal was fed or whether they were allowed to walk around and that type of thing.
Amanda, you touched before on some of the health issues. Could I ask you maybe to start off, and then all of you to talk about what are the health implications of eating meat, and what are the health implications of not eating meat?
Okay.
You want to start?
So I know when you tell people, I've found for the last 35 years that as soon as you say don't eat animal products or meat, people are like, oh my God, where do you get your protein? They suddenly become a bit of a nutrition expert, right? Now, from the Australian Health Survey, the average intake of protein for adults in Australia is 91 grams per day, okay? And this is significantly higher than the amount that is actually the estimated average requirement, or the RDI. And in fact, Australians only get 33% of their protein from meat. They get the rest from grains and vegetables and all other foods that they're eating. So if overnight all the meat in Australia just suddenly disappeared, which obviously isn't going to happen, there's still enough protein in the food supply for everyone, even if they didn't eat anything else, to get enough protein. So it is quite a myth to say, oh, we really need the protein, okay? And it's, similar kind of story with iron. Australians get 45% of their iron from cereals and cereal products, according to the Australian Health Survey 2011 and 12, and they get 15% from meat. So, the idea that we'd have mass anemia if people stopped eating meat or whatever isn't actually correct. That's as far as it doesn't contain essential nutrients. I've already touched on some negatives, but if we look at studies on plant-based people on a plant-based diet, people that don't eat meat, that kind of tells us more about what could be the negatives of eating meat if you look at people that aren't eating it. There's a very big epidemiological study called the Adventist 2 study in California. It's got about 96,000 participants. It's been running for several decades. They've divided people into 5 different groups according to their diet. The omnivores that eat anything, semi-vegetarians, pesco-vegetarians, lacto-vegetarians and vegans. And they've looked at several health parameters including cholesterol, blood pressure, weight and prevalence of diabetes. And what they found in every case for those common health disorders is that people that didn't eat meat were much less likely to experience those. And in fact, the less animal product consumption that people had, the less likely they were to experience overweight, obesity, diabetes, high cholesterol or high blood pressure. And these results have been backed up in a couple of reviews that came out in 2016 looking at plant-based diets and their health effects, and they found a similar thing. They also found the prevalence of certain types of cancer was lower in people that didn't eat meat, but also, as I said before, diabetes, obesity and cardiovascular diseases as well. So I think the evidence is pretty clear that there can be benefits to not eating meat. Obviously, cutting out meat and just adding in donuts isn't a good idea, but we certainly, have found benefits. And there's further studies, more and more emerging all the time, looking at actually using a plant-based diet to treat common health conditions. And what's been found that a plant-based diet can be very useful in treating and even reversing diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and once again, overweight, obesity. And those problems, those health issues are actually the main killers in the high-income countries, so that's certainly worth addressing now.
Okay, thank you. David, do you want to respond to that? So how come you're producing all this meat and it's clearly the research is telling us it's not good for us?
Fortunately, we live on the best country in the planet and life's about choice and we can all make our choices. So we're actually I'm consumer driven, so I'm just responding to demand.
Okay. Do you think that eating meat is good for you?
Absolutely.
Do you want to speak to this issue of the health?
Well, I'm an expert on the environmental aspects, not on diets, but I would say that as a benchmark in our research, we often use the Australian Dietary Guidelines, and they identify 2 types of foods, core foods and discretionary foods. Now, discretionary foods are all those things that most of us eat far too many of. And including in that long list of discretionary foods, these are foods that often have a high energy content, so we end up eating too much intake of energy, but they add very little nutrition. And so included in that list of discretionary foods is processed meats. But in the core foods, the things that we generally don't eat enough of because we eat too many discretionary foods, are meat products. And by the Australian Dietary Guidelines from the National Health and Medical Research Council, meat products are regarded as healthy, nutrient-rich products. And the Australian Dietary Guidelines even encourage some subgroups within the population, some women and some some pregnant women and adolescent girls could actually benefit from eating more red meat. So I know these are statements coming from official panels, and not everyone agrees with those, obviously, but the reality in Australia is not all doom and gloom, because Australians are living long every year. Australians that are born are projected to live longer than the generation or those that were born the year before. The Australia's official population statistics factor this in. We are living longer and longer and longer. And so I'm not so sure that we should be generalising meats being unhealthy, because clearly the Australian dietary guidelines don't categorise meat products that way.
Can I just make a comment? There isn't actually, a lot of people think there's an essential meat group in the Australian Dietary Guidelines or Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. There is no meat group. It's actually called lean meat, chicken, tofu, eggs, nuts and seeds, legumes/beans. Okay, so it's not saying that meat is an essential food. It's saying, yes, eat from that group every day, as it says to eat from all the groups every day. Also, there's an upper limit set in the Australian Dietary Guidelines for intake of red meat of 65 grams per day. Now, that's not very much. I think it's about 455 grams a week, which a lot of people eat in one sitting. So certainly, I would think, why is there an upper limit? There's no upper limit set on tofu or nuts or legumes, but there's an upper limit on the red meat. So that's interesting.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on that? If not, you want to.
I'll have a chat. And Brad, I love salad and I love vegetables, and certainly I eat my share of nuts and legumes and all the rest of it. But I like it with the 350 day grain-fed, nicely seared steak as well. It's sort of, I think there's some balance, and people have just got to have balance in their lives in all sorts of things, and I think eating is one of them. And as long as there's a balance, I think, you can put meat in your diet and remain pretty healthy.
Did you want to add something, Brad?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and I want to say that I appreciate David's honesty. At the end of the day, he is supplying to a market demand, and I think that was a great answer. However, this industry has for years tried to equate not eating meat with not getting enough protein. If we look at the dairy industry, not drinking milk means you're not getting enough calcium. So these industries over the years have actually tried to tell us something different, that actually we should be having these products because of these reasons. And I have to say I'm sceptical about things like, Australian dietary guidelines and things, because the meat industry to me has some influence in Canberra, and I get concerned that all gets mixed up and confused.
Why didn't I get a clap?
It's that huge steak.
I represent an industry that would be delighted to think it actually had influence over weight in Canberra.
Okay, let's talk about the environment, and that's your field. What is the impact of meat production, particularly beef and lamb, on the environment? And is this a cause of concern?
Well, we've looked at it in terms of total diets, because people obviously focus on specific foods, where people don't eat specific foods. They eat foods in the context with other foods, and they add up to an entire diet. And so in some of the research we've done, we're interested to explore what healthy, low greenhouse gas emission diets look like in this country. So we took around 9,000, or more than 9,000 adult diets that came from the Australian Health Survey, and for every one of those diets we calculated a diet quality score, and we also assessed their greenhouse gas emissions. And so we had this matrix, two axes, and we ended up with this enormous cloud of diets, because as you'd imagine, in a country like Australia, which is so diverse with different people, different cultures, different tastes and different ways of living and all the rest, there were diets that ranged enormously in terms of diet quality and ranged enormously in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So we looked at those that were above average in diet quality and below average in greenhouse gas emissions, so that they were the better Australian diets on those two criteria. And we contrasted them to diets which were lower than average in diet quality and higher than average in greenhouse gas emissions, so that negative on both aspects. And what we found was that if we compared those two groups, because we don't want just low greenhouse gas emission diets because they could end up being made up of sugary foods that are not very healthy, and there's plenty of evidence to show that as well. We want both healthy and low greenhouse gas emission diets, not the other, unhealthy, high greenhouse gas emission diets. So what we found is that comparing the two groups, the greenhouse gas emissions were 44% lower for males, comparing those two groups, and 46% lower for females, comparing those groups. So the first thing we would say is that there's enormous variation within the Australian society. But what was most interesting, to wrap up one of the key findings of our study, was that what explained the differences in eating between the good diets, or better diets, which were higher in diet quality and lower in greenhouse gas emissions, to the negative diets, it was these discretionary foods. They varied slightly in terms of fruits and vegetables and meats and dairy and grains, by 10, 20% or whatever. The big difference was discretionary foods. The higher quality, lower greenhouse gas emission diets people ate, similar to or just below the maximum recommended intake of discretionary foods, which is 3 serves for males and 2.5 serves for females. But the high greenhouse gas emission diets, which were low in diet quality, the males on average were eating 6 times that quantity of discretionary foods, and females were eating 5 times that quantity of discretionary foods. So the point I would make is if you want to have if compared to the average Australian, if you want to have a healthier diet that's lower in greenhouse gas emissions, you can go a long way by following the Australian dietary guidelines.
Can I ask you a question, Brad?
Yeah.
That's interesting research. I have had a bit of a look at it. Unfortunately, the trouble with Australians is we've all got such crappy diets that we're kind of comparing junk with junk in a way. What would happen if you compared diets where there were no discretionary foods, or only the recommended, 3 serves a week? I mean, I did the SIRA thing. It said I'm only allowed 1 discretionary thing per week, so that's fabulous for me. If people were choosing, say, within the core foods, the food groups of the Australian Dietary Guidelines, comparing if they chose, let's say, red meat to white meat to legumes to nuts or whatever within each group, have you got any idea what the results would have been like then?
Well, in our case, we were concerned about real diets. Obviously, you can get on a computer behind that reflect what people actually are doing. So there's many people out in the society that are eating much higher quality, lower greenhouse gas emission diets. But obviously, if you sit on a computer, you can design a diet which is very low in greenhouse gas emissions and very high in diet quality, but it's probably not representative of more than the slimmest number of people.
Go on.
But as a dietitian, it's just...
Wait a sec, go on.
I was going to say it's my job to actually try and change what people eat, and it certainly is pushing stuff uphill, I will say. But, when you look at studies like the Oxford Martin study out of Oxford University, that looked at a global approach. It modelled different diets, like the current type way that people are eating in high-income countries, vegetarian diets, or people eating according to the dietary guidelines, or a totally plant-based vegan diet. And they found a similar thing, in that both in terms of health and in terms of lower greenhouse gas emissions, that the less animal food in the diet, so that's not similar, but the vegan diet was higher quality and produced less emissions. So, it's certainly true that we can have a win-win for the environment and for our health by adopting not a vegan donut diet, but a plant-based diet based on whole plant foods. And I think, part of my job as a dietitian is to help people to do that, not just sit back and go, oh, well, they're just going to eat all the rubbish and that's how it is, because I think we need to work on that, because in Australia we've got an epidemic of obesity and diabetes. We've got over 50% of the population actually having inadequate intakes of essential nutrients. So at the same time we've got people consuming too many calories, they're not getting the nutrients that they need, which is exactly what the discretionary foods are. I call them empty calories, the discretionary foods. You're getting calories but you're not getting much else that you need. So I think that's a key issue.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop you there because Matt wants to say something, and then we can hand over, I think.
I just wanted to make a comment on that. And, I have big fears around climate change and certainly beef production in Australia. Some marginal country is continuing to get more marginal. Seasonal climatic conditions are definitely changing, and it's harder to produce an animal out of that country. And now that country will become non-productive as far as being able to produce beef goes in the not too distant future. But on the other side of that, I've also seen commercial cropping, where they grow grains and legumes and chickpeas and all the rest of the rubbish. Because chickpeas are rubbish. Chickpeas are rubbish.
They're a very nutritious food, actually.
The majority of chickpeas have been genetically changed, and so is wheat to a large degree. The wheat that we eat today is totally different from the kite that we used to eat a long time back. But I've seen Monsanto get very rich, and a lot of chemicals sprayed on those crops. There is a covering spray that goes over a lot of that area that basically just denudes that country of any sort of herbage whatsoever to be able to grow a commercial crop over the top of it. I've seen floods in that area where most of that topsoil gets washed into the local creeks. So I think going back to an agrarian type of a society would be the ideal, but commercial production of certainly grains, legumes and vegetables has its shortcomings as well. And I'm not saying beef production doesn't, but certainly beef production, if you limit land clearing and stop what's happening in some less marginal country at the moment, beef production doesn't influence the land as much from what I've seen from a practical perspective as what broad acre cropping does.
Thanks. That's a great contribution. I think it's time that we heard from you. So, do we have any hands in the air? I'm not going to pick you. The people with the microphone will come and find you.
Cheers, guys.
And
yeah,
can you stand up?
Yep. My name's Scott Wallace. I'm an environmental scientist and law student currently. I'd just like to briefly comment on the environmental effects of the animal farming sector. This is the single most destructive industry on the face of this planet. Now, I would expect a fellow scientist to have this awareness, however, it's understandable why a lot of us don't. So a plant-based diet has the smallest effect on our footprint, and looking at the effect in Queensland, there was a comment about the environmental effects. Between 2016 and 2017, almost 400,000 hectares of land were cleared, right? It's the size of the Gabba every 3 minutes. 93.4% of all this land cleared was for animal agriculture. So to say that this isn't having a detrimental effect on our environment is rubbish, and it's suppressing the truth from the public, who need to be empowered to understand that choosing a plant-based diet is the quickest, cheapest, most effective way to minimise our footprint. So given these facts...
Do you have a question?
I do have a question, of course. Back in 2008, 2010, the United Nations Environmental Programme said we need a global urgent shift to a plant-based diet to address the worst effects of climate change. So why hasn't this information been put across, and why aren't we seeing policies and research into really encouraging people to adopt a plant-based diet? And we should be respecting every member of the Earth community's right to exist, flourish and evolve, which means not exploiting animals for unnecessary purposes.
Okay, thank you.
That's clearly a point of view and a good question, but there's not one policy developer up here on the stage, so I think you may need to direct that to another audience.
Hang on, let's answer questions as they come in. Does any of the rest of you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, I will. I seem to have put my hand up for a few. From a practical perspective, and I agree, there's been too much land cleared, and certainly the Queensland Government's done a fair bit with the recent land clearing legislation. But if you have a look at the great grasslands of Queensland, you go out to the Barkly Tableland and places like that are massive production areas for beef. They're naturally plain lands. They weren't cleared. That's just the way that they are. And I did point that there's a lot of country in Australia that probably shouldn't be used for growing animals on. And the more marginal country that we have should probably be locked up and used as a carbon sink and so forth. So I think the face of agriculture will change, and it certainly has to change going forward, because I don't think climate change will allow it to continue in its current form. But that being said, really broadacre farming, if you get out there and have a look at the destruction, and certainly growing cotton is probably the worst environmental crop that you can put in the ground, as far as, you know, siphoning off water from the Murray-Darling and places like that. It's incredible the amount of destruction that goes into a bale of cotton to weave into someone's clothes. So while I agree that certainly things need to change, and they are, and certainly some progressive governments are putting in policies that I think in 10 years' time you'll see the fruits of, certainly I don't think crop production replacing animal production is the answer.
Anyone else? A quick one.
Yeah, I think one thing that really struck me when I learned about animal production was conversion of the food that the animals are fed into meat. And it's kind of like a food factory in reverse when you produce food from animals, because what you're doing is you're feeding, let's say, I think, you know, figures depending on type of animal can be from 5 to 25 kilos of grain, for example, to actually get 1 kilo of meat. And the protein conversion, you're putting in many times the amount of protein, per, you know, kilos of protein to actually get 1 kilo of protein out. So that in itself, you can see how environmentally that can't be sustainable, because you're growing food to feed to animals. Over half the world's grain crop is actually fed to animals that are later eaten rather than to humans. And we've got people starving in this world. And I think we need to look really at this globally, this issue, because it's quite elitist for us sitting here to, you know, to have that luxury of eating meat. And I think that's something to think about as well, that it's not sustainable from an environmental or health point of view, and it's not sustainable globally with the growing population that we've got.
I agree. Yeah, I'm just a little challenged to what eats 25 kilos of grain to produce a kilo of protein.
Look, you probably do know more about this than me, but I do have references for that. But certainly the conversion isn't 1-to-1. If you imagine raising a human...
No, sorry, your statement was 25 to 1, not 1-to-1.
Oh, it's not 1-to-1, no. Of course it's not 1-to-1.
You said it's 25 to 1. I'm just asking, what's 25 to 1? I've been in animal industries for most of my life, and I know of nothing that consumes 25 kilos of grain to produce 1 kilo of protein.
Well, this is from a book by Smill called Should We Meat? He's a Professor Emeritus at University of Manitoba. So
why don't we agree that you two can sort out the references?
The figures are variable.
But you're challenging those figures. Yeah.
Totally challenging.
Yeah. But the efficiency in any biological system is usually less than 10% of conversions.
I just want to hear from Brad and then take another question. Just a quick one, Brad.
I mean, I've got no disagreement with the fact that everything in society has to be improved and made more sustainable. We have to be careful about making big generalisations about Australia based on some statistic off of a website somewhere in the world or whatever. I mean, there are cases in Australia where cropping systems have been converted to low-intensity sheep farming, and they actually are net carbon sequestration through the soil carbon sequestration. So, you know, there's so much diversity in agriculture, there's so much diversity in the environmental context, and as a scientist, what you deal with is you see diversity, you see more and more diversity, more and more variation, and, you know, there's no one answer that just do everything like this and the whole world will be happy. I don't accept that.
Okay, next question, please.
Hello, thank you all. It's been illuminating. I've been a vegetarian since about 2010 and I love it. Best thing ever. I became a vegetarian because I went to the Ekka and saw these poor little bastards being sponsored by McDonald's.
You talking about the children or?
Yeah, the animals were nice too, but yeah. And I just couldn't do it anymore. So anyway, that's my story and I love it. What upsets me now is the fact that we can, I think the arguments that are going on up here are terrific and 50-50 pretty much. What's not 50-50 is watching the horror that goes on in the live export trade. I'd like to ask old mate on the end there, my comrade.
Matt.
what are we actually doing from a union perspective to try to stop this hideousness going on and to get workers, I'd love everybody to be vegetarian tomorrow, it's not going to happen, but so I would like to at least get rid of this dreadful export industry and to find jobs onshore for Australian workers to do some decent, if we have to slaughter, then some decent slaughterhouses in Australia. And, it's not what it's cracked up to be. We all know the economic bullshit that goes on around it is just that. So it's not an industry we have to have. What's the union going to do about fixing it?
Here. I agree with you 120%, and anyone that's followed our union for any length of time will know our objection to the live export trade. If you drive past my office at 39 Lytton Road, East Brisbane, you'll see a massive banner across our building, and we certainly continue to meet with politicians. I've got a meeting with Joel Fitzgibbon next week. He's only the shadow agricultural minister at the moment, but hopefully he'll be the minister next time round. And I'm trying to gain some traction from that side of politics. Obviously, the other side of politics is going to be impossible to get traction from to try and limit or prevent the live export trade. Obviously, that side of politics are rusted onto a free market where a person has got a commodity, they can put it up for sale and whoever's the highest bidder will get that animal. The atrocities that have happened on the live export ships are a public disgrace. They're a disgrace to Australia and they're a disgrace to the farmers that raise those stock, and certainly it's an indictment on our industry that just shouldn't exist. So the union continues to lobby politicians, lobby government, speak to anyone that will listen, expose the issues around live export, both from an economic perspective as well as an animal welfare perspective, because obviously our members would prefer to process those animals humanely on shore and that product be exported overseas in a box. The rubbish that we hear about the lack of refrigeration and all that is just that. It's an excuse. MLA, Meat and Livestock Australia, that is funded by levy money from producers, is rusted on to the live export industry and really pumps a lot of capital into that. Simon Crean now is the head of the Live Exporters Corporation, and unfortunately they seem to have a fairly large voice. We signed the Lima Declaration.
He's an old union man, Matt.
He is. We signed the Lima Declarations back in '74 that basically surrendered a lot of our processing sector, our manufacturing sector, to developing economies. And I think the live export trade is a product of that. And certainly if you have a look at some other developed economies like Ireland and England, now that the Brexit's come about, the first thing that they're looking at is stopping their live export trade. So I'm hopeful that we get a sympathetic ear and we can do the same.
Thank you, Matt. Brad, over this side. Thank you.
Yeah, and look, of course, the footage that we saw a couple of weeks ago coming off of those ships was dreadful. I, for one, was not surprised with anything that came off those ships. We have seen all of those same conditions in plants in Australia. So, unfortunately, I'm not going to be there saying let's get rid of live export and let's slaughter in Australia. We've seen the same sorts of issues going on. Basically, a number of those pens are what we've seen here in our country, just transplanted onto a ship. So I just want to make it clear that the solution is not just getting rid of the ships. There are many parts of this industry where the cruelty is just so incredibly
Brad, I
off
just
the
need to
charts.
ask, are you talking about you've experienced visions of slaughter in Australian processing factories, and is that what your issue with? Or are you saying generally that it's inhumane treatment of animals? Because I think we'll need to have a really good little set to on that one if that's your general statement.
Absolutely both. I have hundreds of hours of video footage come across my desk regularly. And, because I know what the industry likes to say is that when we put footage out, we found one particular incidence of something going on. But the truth is it's not like that. We look at 100 different incidents of the same thing happening, and we choose the one that has the best clarity, the best lighting. I could take you to 4 places within 2 hours of Brisbane that are just as shocking as anything that was seen on those ships.
Well, I can
You can respond to all of that in a minute, but I'm just wondering, let's stay with the live animal export issue just for the moment, because it's so topical and it's aroused so much fervent feelings. I was wanting to ask you, David, what do you think about the live export situation and the footage that we've all been seeing?
The footage would turn the heads of any normal human being. It was totally unacceptable. So nobody could ever accept the practice they saw that occurred on that boat. The challenge is, as Matt's side of the view, a free market is a free market. The people actually that are the customers of those sheep at the end wish to do so for their religious reasons. Their religious belief is that it's fresh daily slaughter into their markets. So we are supplying that demand. Yep, what we did on those boats was actually abhorrent and shouldn't have, and they should be disgraced and probably should be banned for it. But the difference is that's not every occurrence, it's not every day, and let's not deny, let's not deny those people who are dependent on that product for their dietary requirements or to live. They don't have protein products. They don't grow crops and nuts in the bloody sands of the UAE. We grow date palms out there. So they are importing their protein, and they actually do it live because of their religious beliefs.
Anyone else want to comment about the live sheep export and whatever? Do you want to say anything about Brad's comments about cruelty in the treatment of animals here in Australia?
Yeah, well, take the emotion out of it, please. The humane...
I can't do that, but go ahead.
Okay, let's just say. The RSPCA. Do we have a show of hands in the RSPCA? Not from the noisy front row, please. Do we have a general show of hands of trust and belief in the RSPCA in the room? So that will be disappointing to the CEO of the RSPCA, because the RSPCA is about care of animals. It's about the humane treatment, ownership, management and affection of those animals. Of animals. So the RSPCA's point of view, and they have no support for live export where that animal goes on a vehicle past a processing plant. But where there is no processing plant, there is no option for the production of those animals. So their alternative is they could sit on road transport for 35 to 40 hours to get to their next market, or they can actually sit on a ship being fed and watered on the way across for 5 days. So the choice is. So the RSPCA, that we obviously believe has a fair impact and understanding of what humane treatment of animals is.
Anyway,
RSPCA is a pure membership-based organisation, and they won't let me be a member, trust you.
I was wanting to ask Brad again, just following on from his comments. Given the outrage, and probably it would be true to say that there'd be very few people in this room who feel good about our live animal export situation, why is there that disconnect? Why is it that people can sit there looking at that on television and seeing animals treated in such an appalling way and then keep eating meat? I mean, what's going on in people's heads, do you think?
Yeah, look, I actually think it's quite an emotional thing. It's very, very easy for me to sit here and say we shouldn't export sheep to those countries over there because we don't like the way we treat them, we don't like the way they're exported. So we shouldn't do that because we shouldn't do that over there. It's a completely different thing to say, I'm actually responsible for this cruelty and I should change what I eat. That's a rather more difficult place for people to get to. So I think there's that. But there's also, again, just going back to the whole aspect of you know, where the money is and what funds are available and things. You know, the live export footage came off. It was able to get good coverage. It got a lot of TV coverage. They got good contacts with it. At almost exactly the same time as that footage coming out, a documentary was released in Australia called Dominion, which is 2 hours of footage from inside Australian farms and slaughterhouses. And of course, outside of perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 people in the country, nobody else has seen it because we simply can't get that information to the wide enough audience.
Matt, do you want to just say something, and then Amanda?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. I've been involved in the meat processing sector all of my life, and really, my members thought that footage was an absolute disgrace. They were as disgusted with it as any other person within our community. You know, these people are highly trained, they're humane, empathetic people that are just out there doing a blue-collar, hard day's work, a hard job. You know, they are trained, they're professionals. They don't tolerate animal cruelty, and certainly we don't tolerate animal cruelty. If there is ever a case of animal cruelty that a member's been accused of, and if they're proven that, they fight for themselves, you know. That's the end of the story. And the industry is very, very committed to maintain those high standards, and so it should be. And at the end of the day, there's internal and external audits. The external audits are probably tougher than the internal ones because the likes of McDonald's and people like that certainly don't want their name tarnished by any sort of animal cruelty allegations or anything like that. So they do a fairly robust external audit on certain criteria around animal welfare, and certainly our organisation has never seen anything like that within a local processing establishment.
Did you want to say something briefly on this
just
one?
on your comment about why do people watch that and sit at the table and eat their dinner, and I think they're really confused. I think on the one hand they're thinking, oh, I'm against cruelty. For some reason they think that cutting the throat of an animal that doesn't want to die perhaps is humane. They've heard this term humane slaughter, which I think is probably a bit of an oxymoron. I don't really know how it could be humane. But also they're thinking protein, iron, oh, my doctor says I need the iron, or someone said this, or I read this. And so all this conflicting messages they're getting, they're pushing aside the thought of the animal that was a living, breathing being that didn't want to die and just eating the damn meat. And it's convenient and people like the taste of it. So
good comment.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything to the live, that discussion? You don't have to.
No, I don't have much to do with live export.
Okay.
I certainly was disturbed by the footage, but I don't have any scientific knowledge of it.
Okay, well, there's loads of questions. So next one.
Hi, my name's Cara May Kelly. I'm the spokesperson for the Animal Justice Party on domestic violence, cruelty and crime.
And can you ask a question?
I'm going to ask a question. Thank you so much for reminding me. So just to be clear, I was actually an RSPCA inspector for 4 years, and here I am vegan because what I saw in that role is not kind. They definitely look after dogs and cats. But any other animal, that is not the RSPCA's policy. So I'm happy to have a chat with you later on what I've seen firsthand as an inspector and what I've got post-traumatic stress over, actually. So happy to have a chat. So firstly, to AJP, just so we're all clear, asked to be on this panel. We are policymakers and politicians, and we were declined. I think that's very interesting. So, knowing it's wrong, 2 panel members, Brad and Matt, have said you're guilty meat eaters.
No, I never said that.
No, I did.
You did, sorry.
No, I did.
Yeah, 3 of them. Okay, good. 3 people have said you're guilty.
Nobody else said they were guilty.
Yes, they did. Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yep.
No, Matt did.
And more people are waking up.
It was a crime.
Sorry, excuse me?
No, I probably did. I'm
Yeah, you did, absolutely.
I'm
We wrote
happy
it down.
with that.
But anyway,
Write
can
it
we get
down.
to the? Can we please get to the question?
Well, if I stop being interrupted, I absolutely will. Okay, so we have three members who have said you're guilty meat eaters, and more people are waking up to the fact that cruelty is inherent. So there's a reason slaughter happens behind closed doors. If people knew what was going on, do you think the industry would survive?
Thank you.
Also, please watch Dominion.
Thank you. I think I'm going to take that as a comment. Okay. Next question. Thank you. No. I'm taking that as a comment. Another one down there. We've heard about Dominion, and we've canvassed those issues.
Okay. Hello.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Look, in 2015, a submission from the Australian Veterinary Association of Australia in reviewing the effectiveness of biosecurity in Queensland mentions that BJD, which is bovine John's disease, may have been in Queensland for as long as 20 years without being detected by government surveillance. How effective are our surveillance agencies in each state at detecting transmittable diseases from livestock, given that the increase in temperatures and climate change have a direct impact on the physiology, health and welfare of animals, which are in turn consumed by the public? Also, studies now associate Alzheimer's and other neurological diseases which are related to prions, and once in our soils are almost impossible to eradicate. This is really probably for Brad here from the CSIRO.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I cannot. I don't know anything about those biosecurity matters, and I couldn't possibly say anything on behalf of CSIRO.
Does anyone on the panel want to say anything about that? I'm looking at you,
I can make a
Matt.
comment on Johne's disease.
It's Johne's disease.
It's not John's disease, it's Johne's disease, and Johne's disease is endemic with sheep, and it is something that's identified readily. It affects the liver. At each processing establishment, there's a full-time vet. So a vet, anyone with an export licence has to have a vet on site. There's certain inspection criteria as an animal is processed. They're inspected several times through that. There's also an offal inspection. So I'd be very surprised if something like Johne's disease wasn't picked up. Now, if there's a suspect carcass, a vet or a qualified vet will come and inspect that carcass and say, well, no, that gets knocked out, or no, that's just a bit of liver fluke or something like that. So I'll do a bit more of an investigation on that myself, because I find that quite interesting. But Johne's disease in sheep is quite common, and it's certainly managed at the processing facilities.
Okay, next question. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Kelly. I was a medical nutrition assistant in a public hospital for a decade, and then I became an environmental scientist. So I've got a focus on human health and on the environment. I've got a quick statement and a question. Just in regards to responding to market demand, I would just put to you that you have to move with the times. We've been using plastic bags for so long, they're polluting our oceans, they're just an absolute environmental degrading product, and it's pretty much in the media and accepted by the public now that we need to change that. We just need to say, just because we've had plastic bags forever doesn't mean we should keep using them. Same as doctors used to say smoking was good for you. Now we know it's not. We've got plain branded packaging on cigarettes. So I do think you can't just sort of go, oh, the market demand is there. We've got a Western, predominantly a Western diet in this country, even though we do have diversity and multiculturalism, and that diet is based on, you know, refined carbs and a big focus on meat. And I don't think that just means we have to stay like that forever. I do think that we can change, especially as we become more and more aware of, we only get more knowledge over time of disease, of nutrition, of all those things. For Brad, my question was about the research that you referred to.
Yeah.
When you were considering the emissions of the different diets, can I just ask, did you fully encompass all the emissions that might be involved in the diet in terms of processing, packaging, storage, transport. Because when you were talking about the discretionary diets, obviously a lot of those foods are highly processed, they're preserved, they're transported, they're stored for long periods. There's a lot of packaging that then goes and sits in landfill after those products are eaten. And then also I was thinking from the food waste perspective, because food waste, unfortunately, in a very privileged country like Australia where we have more food than we need, a lot of it ends up in landfill and creates emissions as well. So I was curious about that angle of how much you took all those factors.
Well, I can clarify briefly. We used an environmentally extended input-output model, if that is familiar to you. So it encompasses the full supply chain, but not the post-consumer waste aspect or the retailing emissions. Now, so all the supply chain, the full life cycle up to the ready produced product, but it did not include land use change or soil carbon change, because it's very difficult to model soil carbon change because it's very dependent on specific management practices, and we could not characterise all of that. And you also mentioned food waste. We did not consider food waste in the consumer phase, which is the major point of food waste, because we only went up to the ready-to-purchase products. But food wastes are going to particularly affect the perishable products, particularly salads, cakes and fluid milk, that kind of thing.
Okay. I'm going to... the first part of your question was also, and I'm going to ask David and Matt to respond. You were saying, just because we've always done this, just because we've always eaten meat, can't we think about the future and might that change? I think that's what you were getting at. Just because we used plastic bags doesn't mean we have to keep using plastic bags. So I'd be interested to know what you'd have to say to that, David. You know, just because we have been a meat-eating country, do you see the possibility and the desirability of that changing?
I just come back to my opening statement, as we live in a lucky country in life, we actually have the chance to choose. And there's nobody forced to eat meat. There's nobody forced to not go with their green or red bags down to Coles or Woolworths instead of plastic. We make those choices. So until we put up barriers to choice, then surely we can just run by choice.
Okay, and Matt, what about the union? You know, like let's substitute meat production, the work that you and your union do, with, say, tree felling in Tasmania, old growth forests. Now there were forestry union people there who were being told by others, you've got to stop doing this. This is bad for the environment. Do you see your union continuing forever, doing the work that it's doing, or do you think there might be a point at which it's become bad for the environment, for us? Do you have those conversations?
We do, and certainly my personal beliefs, and I'm a firm believer in climate change, and I think coal-fired electricity generation has had its day as well, so it will transition to a cleaner method of that, whether it be pump hydro or solar, wind, tidal. I think, we won't even be having the debate in 20 years' time in relation to coal-fired power generation. Meat is a little bit of a different scenario. It is a commodity that's traded globally. While there is a global demand for the product, irrespective of what science comes out with the health implications to a local group, there will still be a demand for meat going forward. It's interesting, Cargill Inc., which is the largest agri-food business in the world, has now invested in stem cell technology and growing hamburgers in petri dishes. So the way that we see meat production now, in 50 years' time, may not be the same, or it might be scaled down from where we currently sit. Australia is still the 7th largest beef producer in the world. It's certainly not 1 or 2. It is number 1 as far as sheep meat production goes, but it's a fair way down the list. as far as beef production goes. We've got a relatively small population. We do have suitable, a fair chunk of suitable land to grow beef on, and while it's still economically sound to do that, I think there will always be a demand for our product. Domestically, I think that product will continue to get less and less consumed, but I think we'll still be eating meat for a fair while longer.
And your union members will still be in
Most definitely. I might be looking after people growing meat in a petri dish.
Just a point if I can. I won't give you the answer. You can get some homework tonight, but I'd rather you go home and look up what Cargill Inc. is actually growing, the medium it's growing the meat in. You'll probably choose to keep eating Australian beef that runs around in a paddock.
Okay, next question.
Hi, can you hear me there?
Yes, and see you.
Thanks, Matt. That actually leads on perfectly to what I have a question about. Thanks everyone for a great conversation as well. But I was wondering if you have anyone else on the panel has heard about clean meat, so-called clean meat, and if you would have a perspective that you'd like to share about it. For anyone who's not aware, clean meat or cultured meat is meat that's grown using animal flesh biopsies. It's actually, I think, commercially they more brew. It's like brewing it in vats, just like beer, more than a petri dish. But anyway, that's just an aside. I believe the current projection is that expensive cuts of meat will be comparatively priced by 2030, and for cheaper cuts of meat, it will be by 2035. So from ethical, nutritional and environmental perspectives, I'd be interested in what everyone has to say about clean meat.
Can I just clarify? So clean meat is meat. It's not a substitute. Okay, so it sort of sounds a bit like clean coal.
It's the Cargill.
Perhaps. Anyway,
Perfect.
Brad, go for it.
I mean, there are a lot of new technologies. I think that they're largely being developed in the Northern Hemisphere. It'll be interesting to see where they go. Cultured meat, protein from insects and so forth. And they have, completely different environmental profiles and so forth. But I often wonder because whether it will run up against problems with other aspects of people's preference for naturalness. There's a lot of discussion that actually goes in line with a vegan and vegetarian diets about eating natural food. Only eat things that your grandmother saw as food or ate or whatever, and all these sorts of things. So a lot of these products are likely to be very artificial, and that may limit their acceptance. We don't really know. I mean, only time will tell, like any new technology.
Yes, Amanda.
I find it really interesting the lengths that people will go to maintain their intake of meat, and this so-called clean meat movement is part of that. The trouble with clean meat is it's going to have exactly the same nutritional profile or very close to meat as it is. So I think if you're not going to eat meat, why not eat something that's actually good for you? And the smart money is people like Bill Gates and Richard Branson, they're putting money not so much into clean meat, but into not meat, which is foods that are made from natural foods like lentils and chickpeas and all different things, mix them all up together with the right herbs and spices and create a product that has a very similar taste and texture to meat. And I think that's the future of meat, is actually not meat.
Okay. Next question.
I'm really confused about this vision of naturalness that comes from a crop versus naturalness that comes from an animal that's raised on natural land. I'm really confused.
I wasn't trying to say anything about the natural state. I just think that, I think you would agree, making something in a petri dish to emulate another product doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think there is a demand for the taste and texture of meat, and I think that is why a lot of there's millions and millions of dollars going into producing something that has a similar taste and texture, isn't from an animal, and doesn't have the potential detrimental health effects that meat can have.
Okay, next question.
Hey, how are you? Good night.
Hi.
Everybody. My name is Tanya Samora. I've been served in the Israeli army for a year. in Ashdod, so I know exactly the condition of the animals when they arrive there. It's horror. In regards of the chick pigs, soldiers in combat, we was eating just hummus, so definitely it's not rubbish. In regards of the plastic bags that you say that people have the choice, animals have no choice to live. And I want to ask you a question. You were saying that you've been involved in the meat process.
Who are you asking?
Yeah, I don't know his name, sorry.
Matt.
How can you kill in a humanely way a baby, 18-month-old baby that wants to live and is horrified? How can you kill them in a humanely way?
Just on the chickpea comment, I've got to get back to that. And chickpea, I've seen chickpea crops sprayed with Roundup because they're Roundup ready. They've been that genetically modified that they actually can resist being sprayed with glyphosate 450. Now it's not even 390 or 360. It's ridiculous. And certainly our sunflower crops are identical, so they're the same. But going back to humane slaughter, contrary to popular belief, meat workers are very empathetic towards those animals. It's certainly, well, I'm just telling you what I've seen. I've been in the industry for 33 years. People really are doing a job, and they can do that job as empathetically and respectfully as they possibly can in that environment. And that's all I can say about it, that all of my members that I deal with, and certainly if anyone is found to have got frustrated and is cruel to an animal, certainly doesn't get support from our organisation and certainly doesn't get support from industry.
Okay, thank you. Yes, next question.
Hi, my name's Lazel. I'm new to the vegan community. Really quick question, two questions actually. Amanda, just wondering, there's something that I've been seeing pop up on my feed a couple of times, and that's a connection to eating red meat and erectile dysfunction. Just wanted to know thought I'd just lighten the mood a little bit here. But that's part one. But
I think it's the beer that went with the steak at the Norman Hotel.
So I thought that might be of an interest to some of the meat eater males.
I can speak from personal experience.
No, please don't.
That's very nice to know. But secondly, also to, I think it's Dave and Matt, if slaughterhouses did have glass walls, do you think that there would be a trend towards more of a plant-based diet? So two questions there. Thank you.
Okay, let's deal with the erectile dysfunction first.
I can't say I've done studies personally on this, but certainly what is well known that with cardiovascular disease, erectile dysfunction is considered to be the canary in the coal mine, erectile dysfunction, which is becoming increasingly a problem in Australia apparently, is due to atherosclerosis, which is a build-up of cholesterol in arteries, and this affects not just arteries to the heart but the whole body, so it can be an early sign of heart disease. Some years ago I worked in a heart clinic, and that was one of the questions we asked people, and that was because that was considered to be an early sign of blood not flowing properly, because it's all about blood flow. It obviously not only affects men, it affects women as well. So yes, it's due to a diet high in saturated fat, cholesterol, the typical Western type diet, and of course we do get those things from eating meat and other animal products. So yeah.
Matt, we're dying to hear from you.
Well, hey, I've been a carnivore for quite some time, and certainly I've got
too much information.
No scientific evidence on it, but from a practical perspective,
and the minibus full of kids outside.
I haven't witnessed or personally experienced any issues with that.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Brad? Do you want to say anything? I mean, is that part of the CSIRO diet issue that you consider?
No, we didn't study that topic. We didn't have the funds for that.
Okay, all right. Do you want to add?
There's a comment there about if we had glass walls, would people change their attitude? I actually have glass walls in our processing plant. So we actually have nothing to hide because we have a strong belief that our humane treatment means no pain. as long as you come differently to last time, which is when you broke in. So.
Okay, no, people have had their hands up for ages. So next question. Thank you. Where are you?
There's a couple over there.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, no, but I'm not.
Oh, no.
My name's Rowan. I'm a vegan.
Sorry, where are you? Oh, there you are.
Good. Sorry to David. So I just want to say to Brad, I became a vegan after going to farm animal rescue. But I find that, for me, veganism is so much about just emotions, and it's very disingenuous to me to hear arguments from the environment and it's good for your diet. Because if it were not the most environmentally friendly diet, or if it were not the most healthy diet, I'd still be a vegan. So I guess my question is, do you find that disingenuous? And I actually have to say that I agree with David on the point about religion and live export. Because I find that when I go to a live export rally, it's typically much better populated than any other rally that I see in the vegan movement. And I think perhaps that's probably just because we seem to attract people that are racist, for instance, at those kinds of events. So I have a broader question to ask about whether you think it is somewhat disingenuous to convince people by these means when perhaps people are not really convinced by them themselves. And also for someone like Matt, my question is how do you feel about the vegan movement using your workers in a certain way, and that sometimes they'll bring up there's a lot of mental health issues in slaughterhouses and that sort of thing?
Okay, 2 questions, good ones. Brad, do you want to go first on the first part of that question?
Right, so this is about the environmental aspects.
Yeah, sorry, when you just summarise your first part.
So do you feel like you would still be vegan even if it weren't the most environmentally conscious diet? And if not, why does it come up so often in the vegan movement?
Absolutely. Of course, at Farm Animal Rescue, and certainly as far as my background's concerned, it's all been about ethics. We take the time, of course, to look at the animals that are under our care and just see how they react to things and see how they react to each other. And we see things, for example, the way that the mother cattle will relate to the babies and so forth. There was a comment made earlier about cattle being slaughtered when they're 18 months old and all of that sort of thing. Well, I've actually had to destroy a cow that was 3 years old. It was because of significant health issues that were going on. And I actually had that cow's mother there at the same time while that was being done. She witnessed the whole thing and she experienced the whole thing with us. Now, as we were saying, most cattle will go to slaughter at 18 months of age. This was a 3-year-old steer who was bigger, stronger, and certainly more powerful than his mother had ever been. But the way that she looked after him while he was not well, even though he was 3 years old, and the way that she reacted to his death, and the way that the herd followed the carcass to the front gate, I think tells us everything that we need to know about whether animals really care about each other and whether their societies are strong, whether their familial bonds are strong. And so, yes, I don't tend to talk about environment a lot because I think at the end of the day, what we do is just unethical. We're just assuming that we can take these animals' lives and use them for our own purpose. And I have a big issue with that. They're sentient, they love their friends, they love their family. And when we take them to slaughter, they kick and they scream and they fight to survive with every last breath.
No, they do not. Matthew mentioned there before about what you think or don't think about McDonald's. McDonald's has a QA forum that if more than 5% of your animals vocalise in the lead-up process to slaughter, you will lose your licence.
So vocalise is scream,
do
right?
Do not make general statements about screaming animals. It is totally unfounded and not generic across industry.
You're talking about vocalisation at stunning.
I'm talking about the vocalisation from the time they are in the lairage, which when they arrive off the truck, to the time which will be 6.5 hours generally to rest and recover before they go through the processing. So the general statement is actually just
okay, you've made your point. You've made your point. Okay, there was a second part to your question, wasn't there?
So my second question was to Matt, which is just about a lot of the time I hear slaughterhouse workers are brought up and say, oh, look, they have terrible mental health conditions by the vegan movement, and I just wanted a response from you about that.
Yeah, I've heard the same stuff, and I've had a look at the studies, and they're just basically skewed. They come up with answers to questions that are loaded, and And really, to tell you the truth, I've worked with a lot of people in my life, and certainly meat workers rank up there as far as their generosity and their engagement with community. We've got a wing, it's the Lady Slendo Hospital, but it used to be the Royal Children's Hospital, called the AMIU wing, because of the amount of money that the meat workers used to donate. It's a cystic fibrosis wing in the hospital to look after sick kids. So those sorts of statements aren't productive or correct. Recently, there's a small processing facility just to open up at Yamundi, and someone rang me up and started abusing one of my office staff, and I wasn't available. And when I rang that number back, it went through to his message bank, and he was the local real estate agent. So he was more concerned about property prices, but one of the furphies he threw up that it mentally damages the workers that are working in those facilities. I've heard all that. Over my 33 years, I haven't witnessed it, no.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Hey, firstly, I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for actually coming together and having a discussion, and I hope that we keep seeing more farmers and country people come out and have more discussions with people who do care more about the ethics of animals and animal welfare. The question I had actually follows on to what Matt was just talking about with skewing data quite well. So I have a background in science, and from that I've been surrounded by friends that are ecologists, that are environmental scientists. They work in all the different fields. All of them are always complaining to me that since they've studied over the last 10 years in particular, it's becoming more and more difficult to find work, and as such they're getting employed by agriculture industries and mining industries where they're being forced to leave data out and come to conclusions in a way where the scientific data is accurate, much like Brad's paper I was reading just before I came to the conference. What he's written is accurate based on emissions per diet, but it's also leaving out massive levels of emissions from external costs and things like the deforestation and all the other additional issues that cause emission, particularly obviously methane and nitrogen emissions, and the facts that they only last around 12 years in the atmosphere, so they're the most significant to be able to warm the oceans and to be able to carbon sequester through plants. If you look at the Rodale studies in America that were actually done over 30 years, they actually showed huge, vast amounts of land where one field was yielded naturally, the other was done organically.
I need you to get to the question, sir.
So my question is, so because there are these studies out there that are quite heavily contradicting what this paper was, and then when you look into that paper, the CSIRO was actually funded by the meat industry to produce that paper. I'm wondering, do you, Brad, feel that there's a conflict of interest and an issue with objectivity within science papers within the last few years?
Well, on the land use change, you're saying things are left out. The reason why we didn't include the soil carbon change is because of the inability to incorporate. There isn't a consistent data set to enable that to be incorporated, and if it was incorporated, it would favour the livestock industries, which tend to lead to carbon sequestration as opposed to the intensive cropping systems, which are more likely to reduce soil carbon. With land use change, we didn't include that because, once again, we don't have the data in a form that's able to be incorporated into this particular type of modelling. Of course, you can do a particular case study here or a case study there, but a study of the whole Australian food system, we weren't able to include it. And also there's a lot of debate on how it should be included, how the responsibility for the land use change should be apportioned to the different industries. So actually, I don't think there are any national studies on greenhouse gas emissions of diets that include both soil carbon change and land use change, because of the technical difficulties in doing that. Now, the other part of your question was about conflict of interest. Now, I was a bit surprised when we came here. It was sort of, I thought we were all just sort of bringing the perspective, and I didn't know it was going to be a sort of a debate where there was different sides of the argument, because I didn't come here to say for or against any particular side. I'm trying to explain the studies that we did and the evidence that we have, and it's really the best evidence about greenhouse gas emissions of diets in this country by far. Now, with the CSIRO, we are in a situation where we don't have the luxury to just go off and work by ourselves. We are obliged to work in partnership with industry, with communities, depending on what the situation and the type of research is.
I need you to get to the point. Do you get funding from the meat production industry?
Yes, and it's disclosed. But CSIRO also has very mechanisms whereby the reputation of CSIRO is protected, because if the Australian community can't trust the CSIRO, and individuals might not agree with things the CSIRO says, but the CSIRO does everything possible to maintain its standing as a trusted advisor for the Australian community. Now, that might not satisfy individuals who have particular views in a particular way, but at the end of the day, we are transparent in disclosing, work with state governments, federal governments, industries, multinational companies, this, that, and all sorts.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. You want to know? Okay, thank you very much, Brad. Next question.
Hi. Okay, so I wanted to talk to Amanda. You stated before that there are certain health issues in adolescents mainly, such as anemia. I struggle with anemia. I don't eat red meat.
I didn't state anything about that, sorry.
Okay then, I must
But anyway, keep going.
You can still ask your question.
Yeah. I don't eat red meat. That's not because I don't agree with it. It's just simply not in my household. I would like to know how a vegan diet or even a plant-based diet could possibly give me the amount of iron I need in a sustainable way, because I know that in terms of protein, I am quite athletic and I need a lot of protein to build muscle. I can't eat the same amount of protein in, say, a plant as in, a chicken breast or a steak. I just, I'm more curious. I'm not accusing.
Okay.
Good for
Amanda,
you.
do you want to respond to that?
So on the anemia thing, plant foods we're looking at things like lentils and, dare I say, chickpeas, beans. Per 100 grams, even per 100 grams, they're higher in iron than red meat. And per calorie, they're normally substantially higher, okay? So there could be plenty of iron in a plant-based diet. Iron ultimately is an element. It comes from the ground. It's not made by animals. So the animals are only getting iron into their system from eating plants. So we can bypass that and eat plants directly. So certainly, we don't see anemia as necessarily a problem that's exclusive to people on a plant-based diet. In fact, it's quite common in Australia in our toddlers, usually from having too many dairy products in their diet, which displaces iron-rich foods, and also in women of reproductive age, which can be due to heavy losses. So for some women, they are always going to suffer from anemia, and they may have to just resort to taking iron supplements to overcome that. Certainly to say that athletes couldn't get enough protein from a plant-based diet, I think you need to have a Google of plant-based weightlifters and bodybuilders, and they are certainly have a huge muscle mass and are able to get ample protein. So, as I said before, most Australians are getting about 50% or more protein than they actually need, and it's not difficult to boost up protein intake in your diet. So if, there's plenty of ways to do
Or lean red meat 3 times a week and you'll be fixed.
We've got time for about 3 more questions. Yes.
Just a quick comment. Sorry. A quick comment first.
No, it's not on.
It is.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, yes.
To that, I'm nearly 73. I'm a vegan. I have been for 6.5 years. I'm very healthy. I'm a blood donor, and my iron and haemoglobinin's always fine, so you don't need meat, believe me. A quick question to Matt, you and the other gentleman in the meat factory. You said that your workers, they're all very empathetic to the animals and there's no cruelty. Would you be willing to put a CCTV camera in your abattoir, both of you, and make it mandatory for all the abattoirs, apart from the cruelty for the animal farming? Would you do
You need to hold the microphone up, we can't hear you there.
Would you be prepared to have a CCTV camera in your abattoir, and you, sir, and apart from the, and also in the animal farming, because they won't, the RSPCA does not have any jurisdiction in animal farming, much to our disgust. The cruelty is horrific, and no matter what you say, it's always covered up. Always.
Okay, thank you. Matt, and then David, yeah.
I'll answer it first and David can go next, I suppose. I look after meat workers. I don't own an abattoir. My members are under constant CCTV footage and scrutiny now, and normally they're by the facilities owners. They put them internally. As far as live export ships go, instead of having an Inspector General, there should be cameras on those boats, and they should be scrutinised by a separate government department and make sure that those animals are being treated correctly throughout their journey. So that's about as far as I can go with
Madam, I have CCTV all the way through my processing facility.
But I think the issue, and it's come up with a few people's questions, is would you be willing to have the public in one form or another observe what's going on there?
Yeah.
Would either, how would you feel
I can
about
tell
that?
you now that there are several plants that actually have tours of the plant.
While animals are being slaughtered?
Absolutely.
Typically, it depends on the demographic of people. If they're young children or whatever, no. But certainly if they're...
Excuse me, it's an industrial workplace, and
it's really not...
The worker and the visitor safety is paramount.
Any sort of environment that is really not suitable for a child. But certainly, if people are of an age, 16 plus, there's a plant, Oaky Beef, they take people through the plant regularly. And that is to highlight that there are career paths within the meat processing sector. So if young kids want to leave school, not everyone's going to go to university, that they can get a job within the meat processing establishment and be able to advance their career and make it a career. It's not just a job.
Okay.
As I mentioned before, my factory has more glass in it than steel, and as a result we have more visitors than probably any other facility, certainly in Queensland, and they go from school groups from year 9 up, and all are welcome.
Thanks. This is a really sneaky question I just want to throw in. How many women members have you got in your union, by the way?
Tell you the truth, it's about 36%. I was having a look there the other day, so it's significant. We were one of the first unions that got equal pay for equal work back in the early 1900s. So we've been around 120 years. And I pride myself in saying that our union is progressive, and certainly we include everyone.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, another question.
Hello.
Yep, got you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaliyah, and I'm a student of environmental management. And my question is to David and Matt. So it's regarding the animal farming practices, such as free range opposed to cage-raised chickens, or the type of feed that's fed to animals, what goes in it, the content, whether there's antibiotics, hormones, or the mutilating practices. So my question is regarding that, and how much freedom do farmers actually have in deciding which practices to adopt, and how much of it is dictated by food corporations or retailers? So, or is it just purely out of trying to minimize economic costs?
Can I probably go back and let I guess to answer that question best by discussing that my business is a business that is to drive an income and a profit for its owner, a return on investment. The only way we do that is by treating our animals well, giving them the freedoms they require to grow to meet the market specification that we have. Across Queensland, it's all based about an area that an animal requires. In Western Queensland, around Roma, you need 5 acres. I'm too old to know what that is in hectares. You need 5 acres per growing animal between the age of 9 and 15 months for it to achieve 500 grams growth a day on natural grassland tucker. From there, we move into a feedlot, where an animal has over 12.5 square metres for less than 15% of its life on Earth. So it's not intensive, so there's no cages, there's no roof, there's shades. There's actually beach balls in the pens so they can play with. They actually get let out of the pens to walk. It's called an acclimation program. And why is that? Because yes, we want the animal to perform in its quickest time on natural feeds. Our business removed hormones from the production chain back in 2010. It adds nothing to our value, it actually detracts from the quality of the meat. So the base of our business is actually our animals need to do well, they need to be well looked after, or actually lose an enormous amount of money and probably my job.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, down the back.
Hi, my name's Laura. Thank you for braving this panel. I've been to a number of meat and livestock industry events, and one of the themes that often comes up increasingly is social licence to operate and corporate social responsibility. So my question is, what is the meat and livestock sector doing to re-establish the dwindling social licence to operate? And do you think those activities are genuine or just to pacify public concern around animal welfare? Thank you.
I don't quite understand that question, but you might.
Well, I'm
not sure.
I probably won't answer it as you see fit, because I'm not the meat and livestock industry. I'm a private family company within the meat and livestock industry. And as I commented to the young lady over there, our business is in the well-being of our animals, because that's where we derive our income. It's where I actually am able to pay 1,400 people a week to stay in the business that we're in. So the social licence to operate is actually asking us and expecting us, which we respect we do, is to look after our animals well and to treat them humanely so we actually get the best out of them.
Can I just ask, who administers the social licence to operate?
I think it's actually Facebook and Twitter tonight.
Society.
No, but is it a government requirement?
Yeah, I think there was a comment made that said that that's dwindling, that social responsibility. I think that was one of your comments that you made, and I don't see that. Certainly, I think social expectations have always been there, and certainly expectations for the animals to be treated correctly are. I think the live export industry in particular has let that down dramatically, as we've seen in the 60 Minutes expose just recently. But I think the processing sector, it certainly has some issues that pop up from time to time, but typically in a large processing facility, they don't have those hiccups. It is typically a small multi-species plant, really, that may not have the best procedures and protocols in place. So there might be some work by MLA, AMPC to be able to get those plants, to be able to accept those responsibilities and do better. So I'm not saying the industry's squeaky clean, because certainly there has been some issues pop up in the smaller operations, but tell you the truth, the large processing facilities really can't afford the publicity, can't afford the bad image, and certainly they do everything they possibly can to treat those animals humanely.
Thank you. Just briefly, because we're nearly...
I just wanted to say I've done various projects for multinational food companies because they wanted a scientific assessment of what their environmental impacts are, to speak to a variety of different stakeholders. But what I learned was one of the key stakeholders was the own staff that work inside those companies, because they cared a lot about the firm that they were working for, and actually the company felt it was a way of attracting and retaining more high productive, smart people when they showed that they were proactively trying to reduce their environmental impacts.
Thanks. I think one quick last question.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, my name's Linda. I have a question for Amanda. How would one transition from a meat-based diet to a plant-based diet? If you could outline that, please.
Well, the first step would be to stop buying meat. If we look at the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating and that group that I mentioned before that has meat and eggs and tofu and legumes, beans and nuts and seeds. So those are the raw ingredients that I would recommend that people start to get more of, other than the meat, obviously, is the soy products, the legumes like, chickpeas and lentils and kidney beans and all that sort of thing, and some nuts and seeds. And then I recommend people look at the cultures, like they Google plant-based recipes, but they look at the cultures that have traditionally had some really nice plant-based foods, like hummus, and, but like in India, where there's been a substantial vegetarian population for a long time, look at how they make curries with lentils and other things I won't mention, and, in the Middle East and different dishes. And so really recreating, using herbs and spices, those traditional foods, rather than necessarily just going straight for the convenience of the sort of the fake meat product. I mean, I don't really have a problem with them as an occasional thing, but I don't think they're like a great nutritional food as compared to like having your legumes and things like that. So yeah, it's a learning curve for people, I think, to make that decision and then go, okay, how am I going to change my diet to make sure I still have, what I need in it.
And it's okay because it's reversible.
We're going to end it there. We're pretty much right on 8 o'clock. I'd like you to thank our panel, Brad Reestablish, David Foote, Amanda Benham, Brad King, and Matt Journo. Can I just congratulate the panel and you, the audience? I think it's been a fantastic discussion. I've certainly learnt a lot, and I think it's been a great exchange of information and ideas and positions. And thank you all, because clearly the topic is controversial and arouses a lot of passion and a lot of people with very strong views one way or the other. So I think we managed to navigate that pretty well tonight. Please hang around, have a drink if you like. If you love us, join the New Farm Neighbourhood Centre patrons group. Come to more Politics in the Pub, tell your friends, and drive safely home. Thank you.